And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Thursday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. This is a show where we can talk about multiple true crime subjects within a single episode. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have anything to say about some of the true crime cases discussed. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Blackbox Ned. And because today is Thursday, we're going to be having some Starbucks on the cheap. You guys can say hello to Starry. Lately on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, I've been beginning with some of the crime talk points. And these are things that I've gathered from the show Crime Talk, which I'm a daily listener of. And Crime Talk is a show that is done more in what is called the law tuber tradition. Right now, there's an explosion of law tubers where there are lawyers or people from legal backgrounds who are analyzing the true crime cases. Point number one, no client is worth losing a legal license for or going to jail for. And one of the ways to remind people of this is to always separate emotions from evaluations of the evidence. And the next point is that sometimes it might seem like somebody is talking out of both sides of their mouth. When they're evaluating the evidence, they might say, well, the evidence could suggest this or the evidence could suggest that. And I heard this stuff on Crime Talk, and I really found that I've received a lot of these criticisms on Black Box Online Radio, talking to you guys about different true crime stories like the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper. But when you do that and you actually evaluate each piece of evidence as it makes sense to you, that's called being intellectually honest. Should you say, well, like you're thinking, maybe this piece of evidence is actually going away from a theory that I had been supporting. Let's just ignore it? No, there's absolutely no reason to do that in discussions like these that we are having on the internet. But the thing is, not everybody does this. And this is the third point. This can actually get to the level where people almost have a separation from reality, where they are ignoring contradictory evidence. And I hope that I never get to that point, because you guys will hear me make reversals. You'll hear me start defending one theory this month, and 6 months later, I might be defending a theory in the completely different direction. You're following the evidence, or more importantly, it's not like we can just create the evidence on our own. You're evaluating interpretations of the evidence, and sometimes I make my own interpretations of the evidence, my own original observations. Sometimes you guys make your own interpretations of the evidence and your own original observations. And sometimes you have to just say that the evidence is leading in two different directions, or that I think that there are two plausible scenarios. And that's just being intellectually honest. You're thinking and you're telling people what you genuinely think. And it's not just like the debate club where you've chosen a side and you've just decided to play out that side for X amount of time. No, I've never liked that type of thinking. But some people do this. They latch on to a theory. They will only accept or entertain evidence that is supporting that particular theory. But as you can see from the title of this episode, I'm going to be discussing the disappearance of Sudisha Konanki, who was a student who went on holiday in the Dominican Republic. She was there for spring break, and there were actually a lot of college students from the United States of America, which Sudisha was also a student coming there from. And she went to the Dominican Republic, and she was last seen on video walking with a man. Both of them were intoxicated, and then they went to a beach together. It should have been just the two of them. And his story was they went into the water, and an ocean wave knocked them down. The tide pulled them out into the water, and then he was actually able to get her back to shore because he was a lifeguard, and he was able to swim with her up until they got to the shore. And there are a couple different variants of the story. In the first variant that I heard, he stated that the last time he saw her, she was waist deep in the water. But then in some of the newer variants of the story, he says knee deep in the water. but he began throwing up because he had swallowed a lot of salt water as he tried to pull her to the surface, as well as to bring himself back to the surface because he's trying to survive as well. And then he claimed that he got back to a folding beach chair and fell asleep because, again, he's very intoxicated. He also exerted a lot of energy as he was swimming back to the shoreline. And then he woke up and she was never seen or heard from again. And she has not been found since. At the time of this recording, she is still a missing person. And this is one of the things that has been discussed a lot on Court TV. I've watched a couple episodes of Vinnie Politan about this, and they're just asking the questions. Wait a second, Court TV, but is this even a criminal case? This is True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and I'm asking the same question to you guys. Is this even a criminal case, or is this just a missing persons case? Now, a lot of people are trying to formulate theories as to what could have possibly happened to Sudiksha, and I think there are a couple pieces of evidence that are strongly considered. Firstly, the guy that was with her was seen walking back to the hotel the next day as the sun was coming up, but he was not wearing the shirt that he had when he walked to the beach. He did not have the shirt. And, if his story is true that they just went into the ocean and he was able to get back to the shore, well, what on earth happened to his shirt? Did he actually leave something out of the story? Was there something else that was like an important detail that was not included? And Cowpoke is here in the chat. Cowpoke says, morning. Good morning, Cowpoke. Cheers. And I noticed that several different theories began to formulate. Number one, accidental death. Number two, foul play, that they suspect him of doing something wrong to her. Number three, that he passed out and then she was intercepted by a different group of people. And already theories about human trafficking are beginning to formulate. And I was just sitting back and thinking that, when I'm hearing this stuff, again, on Court TV, on Vinnie Politan Investigates, I was like, isn't it premature to start talking about human trafficking theories? Because this is something that is just so vague. Like, how on earth would we be able to jump to that level? And I know, this is very reminiscent of the story of Natalie Holloway, who went missing in Aruba, and the prime suspect, Joran Vandersloot, was under investigation for countless years. And last year, he seems to have given a solid confession, or a confession that could be done to a reasonable amount of satisfaction. At the very least, the family of Natalie Holloway accepted Joran Vandersloot's most recent confession, even though he did give multiple stories over the years. That just seemed like somebody who was stalling and trying to buy time until his next murder conviction, which took place in, what was that, Peru? Terrible story. But when we look at this current case that's going on now with Sudiksha, I mean, there's just a couple problems, though, that I had with the human trafficking angle. Number one, no witnesses to corroborate that. No videos of, like, looking at a suspicious group of men walking down to the beach at the same time. If they have all these videos from the resort of Sudiksha and the guy that she was with, then where are the videos that would support any type of human trafficking angle? Now, the question of foul play is always in people's minds. That's why they're talking about it on Court TV. That's why it comes up on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, because people want to just ask the questions of, did he do something to her? Did he make some type of unwanted advance? And did he do something that was unwanted? And then she fought back, and then he fought back, and she ended up in the water. Okay, of course, people are going to be thinking about those types of things, but people also thought that it was very bizarre that he would go into the ocean with her, claim that he's trying to drag her to the shore, but he would not make sure that she's completely on the beach, that even if she's knee-deep in the water or waist-deep in the water, I mean, how on earth would that be actually getting somebody to shore? You wouldn't put in just the slightest bit of effort to see what was going on? I mean, number one, he was very intoxicated. Number two, he claimed that he was regurgitating salt water. I really think it depends on who you believe and why. But we have Classic Chevy Cat here, says, did he come forward himself or did they track him down? Now, he definitely cooperated with the authorities in the Dominican Republic, and he is going to be coming back to the United States. I'm not exactly sure if he made the original statement. Like, I'm not exactly sure who got in touch with whom first, but I mean, he seems to be very, very cooperative. Lacey is here who says, "Hey, Ned. Hey, Lacey. How you doing?" Grunstruck says, "The University of Pittsburgh girl." Yes, that's right. Sudiksha was a student at the University of Pittsburgh. And the guy was from Iowa, but I'm not exactly sure which school he was going to. He was a student at a different university. Grunstruck says, "About an hour from me in Johnstown, in Pennsylvania." Yes, so you must be hearing a lot about this particular story. But the problems, though, that I have with foul play being involved with this is also something that is very, very human. And it's not about analyzing people's stories and trying to find some type of little problem that is in somebody's story. It's also about just thinking about what could have happened. Like two people are kind of swimming in the ocean or they're kind of on the break line of the waves. They're both very, very drunk. And then they get knocked down by a wave. And then the wave pulls them into the ocean. And remember, I talk about this on Black Box Online Radio all the time. When someone is intoxicated and they are near a water source, the risk of dying is just exponentially higher. So when this could have happened, they got knocked down, they got pulled into the ocean. Maybe everything that he said was true. Maybe he got back to the beach here because he thought that she was safe enough, which, okay, you can see that maybe I don't accept that part of the story. But he was not paying attention. Maybe that was a moment of negligence on her part, but it's quite possible that she didn't put forward the extra steps to get onto the shore, and she was actually standing still, waist deep or knee deep in the water, got hit by another wave, and got dragged out. That would provide all of the explanations. As for the missing T-shirt, maybe he lost it. Maybe he was holding on to it when he got knocked down by the first wave and he lost it in the ocean. Just because the T-shirt is missing does not implicate him in a murder. Just because the T-shirt is missing, that doesn't implicate him in any type of negligence. So this appears to be something that could perhaps quite easily be explained by just a terrible, terrible tragedy. And as I understand, the family of Sudiksha has also reached out and said that they thanked him for trying to save her life the first time. And sometimes there are just unfortunate events where we cannot blame somebody, even if it seems like they are likely to blame. But I also wanted to talk about this particular story because Sudiksha is of South Asian descent, and sometimes the media will just latch on to this concept of, oh, they only care about white people. No, not the case at all. I've said this stuff for years on Black Box Online Radio. Perhaps some of you will remember this story of the disappearance and murder of Gabby Petito from about 3 years ago. And that was a case when there were these videos that were made by a boyfriend and girlfriend that were traveling around the country driving in a van, and they were actually using that as their mobile home, so to speak, temporarily. It's more or less a van life experience. You could say camping, but it's a van life experience. So they were filming this stuff, and the girlfriend, Gabby Petito, went missing. And ultimately it was learned that she was murdered by her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. And the media was just like, oh, everyone's only talking about this story because the victim was white. And I did a direct response to that on Black Box Online Radio, where I was simply talking about how that's not true. Guess what? That doesn't happen. This whole thing about the mainstream media is only going to take notice of somebody's story because the victim happens to be a Caucasian. What do they call that? MWW, missing while white. That's how you get mentioned in the media. No, not at all. Look at Sudiksha's story. Once again, she is of South Asian descent, and she is being talked about all the time on national television. And there are other stories, like perhaps the disappearance of Elisa Lam, which ignited a lot of people's fascinations with not only the true crime world, but also just unsolved mysteries that are really dealing with some very human elements. People will take notice of stories that involve people of all races. And the thing that I said in my episode about Gabby Petito is that it's not so much the color of somebody's skin. Martin Luther King, you were right about that, sir. It's also about the ability to interpret the evidence. And it's when people have clues that they can analyze and investigate, like in this case with Sudiksha, They have the surveillance videos, the CCTV videos from the resort where she was staying, and they can see two people walking to the ocean, and the guy's wearing a shirt. Two people, one person walking away from the ocean with no shirt. People can be like, what could have happened? And people try to arrange those types of gaps with a sequence of events that makes sense to them, and they explore the possibilities, and they try to eliminate possibilities and support possibilities. And that's why stories get picked up by the mainstream media. That's why certain stories become more famous on the internet. Have you not heard of something called the Zodiac Killer? Have you ever heard of that case? Well, that is one where there are so many clues that people can interpret, evaluate, and investigate. Like, there are letters and ciphers and diagrams and greeting cards and phone calls and scribblings on a car door. People can interpret these clues and they can formulate their own responses about them. Now, of course, there are cases like Jack the Ripper that have much fewer pieces of evidence, even though there are numerous letters. But also, even in the D.B. Cooper case, there are letters, and there are also stories of D.B. Cooper, and people analyze these very human elements. So this is how these cases become more popular than other cases. Because, say, for example, you might be wondering, why do some serial killer mysteries become more popular than other serial killer mysteries? Well, there you might find this stuff on Wikipedia about an unsolved set of homicides where 3 people were murdered at gunpoint, and then that's all they really have. So what was it? The exact example I was thinking of was the Atlanta Lovers Lane murderer. Maybe you've heard me talk about that case before on Black Box Online Radio. I've definitely mentioned it. And with that one, somebody was targeting couples that were parked in cars at lovers' lanes. Yeah, but the victims were just shot. And the authorities were very adamant that this killer was going to strike again, but the killer didn't. Atlanta Lovers Lane murderer. Maybe you'll also find it written as the Atlanta Lovers Lane killer. But this is a very clear example where there aren't a lot of clues for people to investigate and to evaluate and to look at in terms of putting a theory together. In fact, there are very few clues. Now, sometimes there are going to be members of law enforcement or private investigators, or maybe attorneys, lawyers, or people who have a first-hand connection to these types of cases, and they make it their personal mission to try and solve the case or to try and conduct their own personal investigative process to get answers. But the difference is those people have access to evidence that the average person isn't going to have access to. And I think that that is just all what it comes down to. The clues are so present in some of these cases, and they are getting more and more present as time goes by and as we enter into a more electronic age. But anyway, I hope Sudisha is found, and I also hope that the mainstream media will wake up one day and realize that it's not all about race. But you know what? The sad thing is, I think almost every one of you who listens to Black Box Online Radio already knows that. You already know that it's not only about race, and it's not only about MWW missing while white. I mean, you guys know that. It's almost as if they just say that stuff to try and get a reaction out of people because they know that somebody's going to get bothered by that. They know it's not true, but it creates a certain type of friction, and then it allows for them to just keep building up flames around the same fire, just to keep that fire of race baiting going and going. And they will be doing this until the end of time. Standing up to it is something that we can do on our own terms, but it's almost just like an endless cycle of just dealing with the MSM constantly trying to set people off. And it's not only with race. They can do it with religious issues. They can do it with political issues like liberal and conservative, that type of divide. They can do it with even with smaller things like sports teams. They can try and divide us in that particular way. Absolutely saddening. Now, some of the other true crime content that I've been following is getting back into the swing of things with looking at some of the prison documentary series that are out there. I've talked to you guys a lot about how I got started in the true crime world with shows like America's Most Wanted and Cops. And that was when I was like really young, like 8 or 9 years old. And in my early 20s, at about 20 and 21, I went through my serial killer documentary phase. And then at about 22, 23, 24, I got pulled into the world of prison documentaries, and I became a regular watcher of Lockup. Like back when they used to do the marathons just on Saturdays and Sundays. Excuse me. Maybe that'll make things a little bit better. And Lockup just tells the story of prison life. And overall, though, I just really could not find out why I was watching it at the time. But I started again and Lockup, and there's also a similar show out there called Hard Time. And they tell these stories of prison life. And so much of it focuses on just conflicts that get created simply because people want to prove that they have the ability to create conflicts. And it only takes a little bit of time after watching prison documentaries to recognize that it's all about power. It's all about these types of power dynamics that get created within the prison. Like you have the warden, then you have the COs, the correctional officers, and then you have the inmates. And instead of just having a bunch of inmates that can overthrow the warden and the correctional officers, they actually want them divided into different sections, almost like divided into what? Political parties, or how about this? Teams or alliances. And alliances is actually an appropriate word, whether it's the Aryan Brotherhood and the Bloods and the Crips, and perhaps certain gangs that are connected to the drug cartels. And it's all done and managed by the administration, and they want it that way because it keeps the power divided. And we were just talking about things such as race and religion, maybe even fandom. They want it divided along those lines as well, because those boundaries are so easy to reinforce. And sometimes it can be rather frustrating. And I think the most frustrating part is that a lot of people know that they're being manipulated. And a lot of people don't seem to want to fight back against the manipulations. They would rather go with the flow because, number one, survival. Number two, they want to prove that they are strong enough to stand up to the challenges of being part of that system. And number three, it's prison. So there actually are going to be rewards for certain types of behavior. And by rewards, I mean things like cigarettes and food. And like the most recent episode of Hard Talk that I was just watching, this one guy would cook potatoes in his cell and he would wrap them in plastic, put them in a sock, and kind of like lower them down to different members of the cell block. All right, well, you can't find ways to trade for potatoes in prison if you are not in the place of something to trade to begin with, if you're not in possession of something to trade to begin with. So there are rewards about why people would fall in line with these types of, well, these types of very inhumane practices. And we have a comment here from Creepy Chris who says, "Good morning. Really enjoy your work. Listening at work." Hey, Chris, you got a cheers from Starbucks. And to confess, the reason why I started watching more of these prison documentaries was I went back and I rewatched the video series about Henry Hodges, who was a serial killer known as the Screaming Strangler. And he was a homosexual serial killer who was actually, I guess you'd call him a bisexual. And he was a victim of abuse and rape when he was a kid. And then he went on to recreate the destructive behaviors. It seems like he did some prostitution. And he was actually reported to have been the most mentally ill inmate on death row in all of the United States of America. He made international news in 2022 when he tried to cut off his penis with a razor. Or I shouldn't say that. He actually did cut off with his penis with a razor. He didn't try to. And then he even held it up for the other prison guards to see, showed absolutely no pain at all. And I learned about him because of the show Lockup. And they said that they had to have 5 guards escorting him at all times when they were moving him out of his cell. And one of the guards had to hold a video camera just to document the amount of force that they were using on him to show that it was necessary. So after he cut his penis off, he was brought to a hospital. The doctors were able to surgically reattach it. And then they brought him back to his cell, and he just had to be restrained against a concrete slab that had a thin mattress on it for 23 hours a day. And he gets the name the Screaming Strangler because at times he would just start screaming uproariously, and it was just very, very clearly just getting out of control. However, this is some one case where people are just like, this guy belongs in a mental health facility. He does not belong, strapped to a concrete slab for 23 hours a day. But I was just reading up on his case looking for any updates, and it doesn't appear that there are any major changes. It seems like he is still at the same Riverbend prison where he was before. Now, some of the other high profile cases that often get talked about in these lawtuber circles are the stories of Lori Vallow Daybell, as well as of Karen Reed. The Karen Reed case is one that I'm not extremely familiar with, and that is one where she was accused of running over her boyfriend with a car. Her boyfriend was a member of law enforcement, and some people think that she was just absolutely framed as part of a bizarre conspiracy involving other members of law enforcement, and then there are other people who think that she was guilty. With the case of Lori Vallow Daybell, it's a very complicated story, and even after watching like multiple episodes about it, I'm not even sure I can articulate it completely. Lori Vallow Daybell was married to a man named Charles Vallow, and firstly, he dies, and then she tries to more or less find a new man who happens to be some type of spiritual cult leader, and ultimately, her kids go missing, they wind up dead, his wife ends up dead, and again, it's a very complicated story, but it seems like there's just absolutely no empathy involved for any form of human life. And yet, these are coming from people who are trying to be spiritual teachers. And that's one that I'm going to have to look more into in the future, only because, even though I've watched a lot about it, it's very complicated, it's very intricate. It's like when we had the stories of the Murdoch murders involving Alec Murdoch and the deaths of his wife Maggie and his son Paul. This was just one where there are just so many different layers and elements to it. It's a twisted, bizarre, and confusing story because multiple crimes were being committed and taking place all at once. Whether it's firstly the unfortunate death of a woman named Mallory Beach who died in a boating accident, which was perhaps caused by his son Paul, who just seemed to show absolutely no empathy for the victim. And then that led to a series of investigations into the Murdoch family, and they found out that Alec Murdoch was abusing all types of funds from his clients. He's just stealing money, and then he has his wife and son murdered as a way to just be this type of enormous distraction. Although it didn't work, he then paid somebody to shoot him in the head, but he survived. The bullet only grazed him, so he just ended up being one of the most disgraced individuals in the United States of America, as well as part of a very high profile murder trial. Now, ultimately, he was found guilty, but his lawyers are trying to get him a new trial and just saying that there was a bunch of unfairness going on. And, just there really is no limit to human depravity, whether it's people murdering their children, whether it's someone cutting off their own penis. And there is just no level to what humans will do to other people or to themselves. And I've really found that this is the case when I look at a lot of the other lesser known serial killer stories here on Black Box Online Radio, because I found that those stories are even more vicious than, say, that of the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper. But Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer are going to be more famous, not only because of the clues that can be analyzed, but also because of the simplicity of the cases and the small number of victims. And we have a couple comments here in the chat. One of them is from Cowpoke, who says, I watched the Karen Reed trial the full way through. I feel that town has a lot of bad cops. Oh, well, yes, Cowpoke. There was also just a news story that came out yesterday about how one of the police officers in that town was removed from duty, or he lost his job because he was making inappropriate comments about Karen Reed. And when I actually looked at the comments that he was making, he was talking a lot about her physical appearance, but and just saying that he didn't like it. However, they thought that was warrant enough to remove him. I thought it was going to be something way bigger than that, like about how he was conspiring against her. But yes, it seems like the cops are up to no good there. And Jerome is here from Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. Jerome, how's it going? You get a cheers from Starry. saying hello, Mr. Dahan. Hello, everybody. Hello to you too, Jerome. Oh, Jerome, by the way, did you see that there's going to be a new French language Zodiac Killer documentary that's coming out? Are you the one who shared that? Or, yes, were you the one who shared that? Because I saw it on YouTube and somebody had posted on Facebook. Was that you? And I'm definitely looking forward to that one. And that was the first time that a documentary team ever contacted me and asked me to be in a Zodiac Killer documentary. I have no idea if they're actually going to use my footage, but what happened was I received this email from someone who pretty much just said, "Hello, I am from France. We would like to use images from your show in our documentary." And I'm like, well, hey, that's a great honor. Will I be paid for it? And she's just like, no, remuneration will not be available. And I never heard anything back. So, I mean, they said that remuneration will not be available. And I'm like, that's fine. You can use clips of my show. It's actually from the live streams in this very room that you're looking at. They wanted to put it in the French language documentary that's going to be coming out, which is mostly going to focus on Faisal Zarawi and his observations, of course. And that's good. That's good. He is one of the French-speaking zodiologists. Faisal Zarawi is, of course, the guy who claimed that he saw the Z13 and the Z32 ciphers, and it all comes back to Lawrence Kane. And he was also the one who visited the sites that with the rock formation. I'm not the biggest fan of his, but yes, okay, of course, he would be the kind of person that you would want in a French language documentary. And as I understand, Tom Voigt had been working with them for quite some time. But yes, they asked if they could use, segments of these live streams that you're listening to right now in their documentary. But that's just the beginning. I mean, I exchanged 2 emails with them and I never heard anything back. So I think that sometimes, they might just say that to people and they might make like, what's it called? Like a first cut. And then they might take certain segments out, and who really knows if that's going to happen. But I am really hoping to see that one just for a purely for a selfish reason. And yes, I will be using the English subtitles, but we're going to see when that one comes out. And I'm also more looking forward to Zodiac Killer Project, the film from Charlie Shackleton that I was talking about on Monday. I'm still waiting for the release date of that one to the general public. It's now playing on the festival circuit. And I really don't think I'm going to like that film too much, but somebody made a Zodiac Killer documentary that's doing a lot what I do here on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, talking about multiple stories within a single episode. But, we've got Jerome here, and Jerome is the host of the panel discussion show, and I have returned to those discussions. The Zodiac Killer panel discussion show comes out on Mysteries with Mr. Belgi, and we talk about all things Zodiac. And last time we had Jerome, of course, with me and Druzer and Ross Geraci and Zach Wilcox, who also uses the name Zach Menace. And during the last episode, I thought that Druzer was just completely on point because he had to do a lot of the uncomfortable things that I have to do when I'm talking about all of these different true crime cases on BBO War. And that is that it's exactly what I said at the beginning with the crime talk points. Sometimes it sounds like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, but you're just trying to be intellectually honest. Or more importantly, in an unsolved mystery, you have to admit that you don't know something. And one of the most frequent questions that comes up is, well, do you think that the evidence suggests this? Like, does the evidence suggest that the Zodiac Killer lived in Vallejo? Does the evidence suggest that the Zodiac was 30 years old or 29 years old? Maybe. I mean, we can make some educated guesses. The exact same thing is true. Oh, well, wait, Jerome says no. Jerome says no to which part? Which part do you say no to? And, like, the exact same thing could happen in the D.B. Cooper case. You could say that, like, you might have some reasons why you think that D.B. Cooper is 30 years old or 35, 40, 45 years old. Oh, Jerome says no to both. He does not think that the Zodiac Killer lived in Vallejo, and you also do not think that the Zodiac was 30 years old. Okay, sure, sure. But Jerome, of course, has suspects, and his suspects would be Don Cheney, Sandy Panzarella, with assistance from Ron Allen, correct? And we have Steve Cross says, "Hi, how are you?" Hey, Steve, I'm doing just fine. You got a cheers from Starry. And Jeff Jones is here. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? Steve Cross says, "What do you think happened to the girl? Did she drown in the ocean or foul play?" Overall, Steve, I'm really leaning toward an accidental death of drowning in the ocean. I think she lost awareness of what she was doing. And I mean, the guy appears to have altered his story a couple times. And one thing, though, that I think might actually be disingenuous about the disappearance of Sudisha is that he says that, one time she's knee deep in the water, waist deep in the water, she's safe of going off on land. I think that he may not have actually known what was happening, and he was saying some untrue things. And then you talk this over with people, maybe lawyers even, and they're like, okay, just say you saw her walking in the water, kind of walking sideways. It seems like he's finalized on that, when I don't think he really had any idea about what was going on. And he's just changing his story because he doesn't know what people want to hear. But yeah, I think that she was not completely out of the water. She got hit by a wave and got dragged back into the ocean and got pulled in by a riptide or a rip current. And she perhaps just had the instinct to just kind of go limp, and they may never be able to recover the body. But just because there are inconsistencies with his story, and just because he altered his story, that doesn't mean he was guilty of murder. No. For the following reason: sometimes people who are innocent will alter their story out of nervousness, panic, fear of punishment, fear of being punished for a crime that they did not commit. It doesn't mean they were actually guilty of the murder. People will look at this all the time. Oh, somebody changed their story? Yep, they're liars. They're lying. The only reason somebody would do that is because they're clearly guilty. Andrew WVA says, "I wish her friends had kept a better eye on her." Okay, Andrew, firstly, brother from West Virginia, nice to see you. I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, that's almost like an elephant in the room issue where I was thinking that when I was watching this. I mean, wasn't somebody looking out for her? I mean, if she had other friends there, and even though the guy that she was with says that he was just intoxicated and disoriented, when he had the awareness to pull her back to the shoreline, did his body just give out when he got onto the beach himself? I mean, I guess that's possible during intoxication, but wouldn't he even have kept a better eye out for her? Because this is the stuff that they're really getting into on court TV, when they're like, his whole claim was he got exhausted because he was trying to get her to shore to safety. Well, it doesn't sound like he actually got her to shore to safety. And if anything, though, I mean, if this guy did something, it was probably just negligence. Steve Cross says, "Is this live just talking about the girl, or you can talk about other cases? I don't mean either way." Yes, Steve, this is True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, where multiple subjects are welcome within a single episode. You can share anything you like. Classic Chevy Cat says, "Did anyone mention her phone?" No, I don't recall anything about her phone. She had clothing that was left behind on a beach chair, and I'm not sure if her phone was there or not. But Steve says, "Did they give him a lie detector test?" I don't believe so, because I also noted that during the interrogations, there were some questions that he did not answer, but he was purely doing that because his lawyer had instructed him not to answer certain questions. And there are a couple reasons for this, as they got into on court TV, because the Dominican Republic has a different legal system than the United States of America. And because he's crossing international lines to go back to the United States of America, and the person who went missing was an American citizen, even though he did not get charged with a crime in the Dominican Republic, he could still get charged with a crime in the United States of America and go to trial in the United States of America, even though nothing happened on American soil. So he has to be very careful with what he says. And his lawyer had instructed him not to answer certain specific questions, which I don't even know the answers to. So if they were to give him a lie detector test under some type of force, then perhaps he would still have the ability not to answer those specific questions that people would be curious about. And yes, that looks like we are caught up with the chat. But hopefully at some point though, we will get answers. Now, with the story of Natalie Holloway, we never really found closure in that one. Yes, I just talking to you guys about the final confession from Joran Vandersloot, who most likely murdered her, but you would say he murdered her. And I'm phrasing it like that because it seems like an altercation kicked off, and he made an advance on her that she didn't want. She kneed him in the groin, and then he kicked her in the head and knocked her unconscious, and then put her body in the water, which I would say counts as murder. That would constitute murder as opposed to a lesser crime. But the fact that her body was never located or found is just going to be very, very saddening because the family will never truly know what happened. They may have just kind of given in at this point, but they will never truly know. Andrew WVA says, one time at Myrtle Beach, I stupidly went into the water when the red flag was up for rough water and waves, and it took everything I had to swim back. Well, of course, Andrew, I've never been in one of those rip tides or rip currents that has completely beaten me. Obviously, I'm still here. But I've never faced one that had an extreme resistance, but a lot of people do drown in them. They just get pulled out to sea, and they had to warn us about this so much as a kid, but I'm glad you made it back, of course. I haven't experienced one that was that intense. Steve Cross says, most people who disappeared suddenly in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s are dead now. Yes, they are. Very saddening. And last week I was talking to you guys about the disappearance of Mora Murray. And that is one where, unfortunately, I do not believe that Mora is still alive. I think that Mora passed away very shortly after she disappeared. Mora may have even passed away on the day of her disappearance. And some people were talking about how the new evidence in the Mora Murray case might be pointing toward an actual conclusion. I was very skeptical of it on the live stream that I did on Saturday, or I guess it was Friday night, your guys' time. And that was one where they found a fingerprint in her car, and the fingerprint was on file and had been on file for years. And then somebody got arrested for running an illegal scheme where he was doing, it's not only a fraudulent scheme, it was also animal cruelty was involved with that. Someone really wanted me to say that on these episodes. And they fingerprinted him for that crime, and his name was Stephen Baldwin, and he's serving 15 years in prison right now for the illegal operation. But when the fingerprint was found on the CD, I mean, like, I was just thinking, if it had been found on a bottle that was in the car, if it had been found, let's say, on the box of Franzia wine that she had in the back, if it had been found on the Diet Coke bottle that was underneath her black Saturn, I would be like, all right, this guy's involved. This guy's involved. And someone else wanted to challenge me about a particular comment that I made in regards to the Mora Murray disappearance. And if you're unfamiliar with that one, on February 9th of 2004, Mora Murray crashed her car into a snowbank off of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, and she was never seen or heard from again after that night. The last person to see her was a school bus driver named Butch Atwood, who asked if she needed any assistance. She said she had already called AAA, so she didn't need assistance, and he thought that was untrue because there was no cell service in the area. And I need to make one correction. Butch Atwood claimed that there was no cell service in the area, because a big problem is all cell phones are different. I used to work at a summer camp in 2004, actually, and I had the only cell phone that could work in the camp. And people were always asking to borrow my cell phone. One guy even gave me $5 once so he could make a call with my cell phone. His phone didn't work at the camp, but mine did. And one guy once even gave me a magazine, and I'm like, I actually really didn't like that guy that much. He gave me a magazine. I'm like, well, thanks for the magazine, but I still don't like you. All mentally, because he would ask to use my cell phone like 3 or 4 times a week when I was working at that camp. The whole point is some cell phones work in those areas, others do not. Mora may have been able to call someone, but they've examined her phone record, so they would have known if she had called from her expected cell phone. She must have done it with some type of burner phone that nobody knew about. The second point is somebody wanted to challenge me on something that I had said about how there's no evidence that there was a second person in Mora's car. Well, one of the witnesses who saw the black Saturn claimed that they thought that somebody was smoking a cigarette in the car. Maybe that was Stephen Baldwin, who was her passenger the whole time. But on the Missing Mora Murray podcast, they did address this, and I knew exactly what they were talking about. Back in 2004, 5, and 6, I mean, I heard this stuff all back in 2015, so those years were a little bit fresher in my mind. When you would make a call on your cell phone in the past, there would be a red light that would turn on that you could see from the outside. And some people think that when someone said they thought they saw a cigarette, like a lit cigarette in the car, or somebody smoking a cigarette, that might have been Mora trying to call somebody, and the red light on the cell phone was on. Those are just possibilities. Okay, so Steve Cross says, so you think that she used a burner phone rather than she just lied? Well, Mora didn't lie to anyone, Steve, because Mora was never held accountable for the cell phone. Mora was never seen after February 9th of 2004, so no one ever questioned Mora about her phone records. Do you mean that like Mora was like trying to communicate on a burner phone covertly? I don't think so, because the person that she would have wanted to hide that the most from was Bill Rausch, her boyfriend, who was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Mora went missing in New Hampshire. She was a student at UMass Amherst. The other person that she would have wanted to hide stuff from was her father, Fred Murray. And cell phones were so different back in 2004 because it's not like you would just sit back and watch videos on your phone, right? No, that didn't even come out later. That was with the iPod video that came out later. Like you needed an iPod for that. Like cell phones were really just flip phones that were used for phone calls, text messages if you were lucky, and also maybe you could have like one or two games or something. And when photos came out on phones, they were still very, very rudimentary. So I don't think that Mora would have had any reason to conceal that type of stuff from people. It's because she knew that people wouldn't read her phone records while she was still a student at UMass Amherst. Jeff Jones says, I think that evil cop named Bruce McKay has something to do with Mora's disappearance. Could be. Bruce McKay comes up a lot in these discussions. Cecil Smith is the other member of law enforcement. And we have an interesting question here from Steve Cross, who says, do you think we'll ever know for sure? I think that the disappearance of Mora Murray has a much higher chance of being solved than the disappearance of Natalee Holloway, because with Natalee Holloway, it's most likely her body got pulled out to some remote part of the ocean, Atlantic or Pacific. Atlantic Ocean, of course. And then that's going to be nearly impossible to find her. With Mora Murray, it's quite possible that her remains are buried in the woods either by natural means or by human hands. And, I mean, that's a case, though, where I had an enormous reversal on it. My immediate impressions of the Mora Murray case were all about accidental death. I thought that she was somebody who was a cross-country runner. She ran away from her car, and she was just trying to do something, do some type of action plan. Okay, her car's off the road. She thinks that it won't start. And it actually could start, though, by the way, but she thought that it was damaged. So she just started running. I thought she just entered the woods and she passed away based on her own intoxicated state, and also she had just given up emotionally and mentally, and she froze to death. But where's the physical evidence of that? Where are the human remains? Where's the backpack? Where are her shoes? Where's anything that would support that theory? Ultimately, I had to move toward the theory that she was abducted and that she was ultimately murdered. And I hope I answered your question, though, Steve. I think it has a higher chance of being solved than some of these disappearances. Unfortunately, for the story of Sudiksha, that might be a case where we might never get answers as to where her remains ended up. I'm just being honest. Steve also says, I agree with most of your assessment. Thanks for your contributions, Ned. Well, thank you, too, Steve. And this show wouldn't happen without you guys. And this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is going to be winding down. Thank you so much to everybody who put your ideas in the comment section and in the live chat. And these episodes are going to come out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And also, you can tune in tomorrow on Friday for an episode about D.B. Cooper, and on the weekend for an episode about JonBenet Ramsey. Lots of true crime content here on Black Box Online Radio. So one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. And, of course, get this show anywhere you get your podcasts. You can download for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. So, thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And let's look forward to that French-language Zodiac Killer documentary. I hope they have English subtitles. You guys have a wonderful day, okay?